Love when tech issues are brilliant. That intro was so nice, we had to play it twice. Hi, everybody. Good evening. Mayor Pro Tem Tasha Harper-Madison. I want to wish you a happy Election Day Eve. I get to be the proud City Council representative of District 1, that's East and Northeast Austin, and I'd like to welcome you to another edition of our bi-weekly live stream, Talk with Tasha. We're coming at you every 2 weeks with critical conversations about the issues that matter most to you. There's hardly a topic more critical than civil rights. And tonight, I have a guest who is an expert and then some in that field. But before we get to her, like peas and carrots and peaches and cream, civil rights just pairs perfectly with voting rights. And tomorrow, you have our latest chance to sing aloud your voice at the ballot box. In case you've missed it, there are 8 questions before Austin voters tomorrow. There are high-profile decisions about the power dynamic between mayor and city council, as well as whether we should reinstate criminal penalties for people who sit or lie in public when they have nowhere else to go. But all 8 questions will have lasting impacts in the future of our city. Turnout in May elections is historically low and is always higher in wealthier parts of town west of the highway. We saw a huge surge of voters on the east side the last day of early voting, with lines forming at the Millennium and Parque Zaragoza voting centers. For the most equitable and representative results, we need to make sure to get all our friends, our family, our neighbors to the polls tomorrow. The local chapter of the League of Women Voters has put together a voter guide in English, Spanish, Chinese, and Vietnamese. You can check it all out at lwvaustin.org/voter-guide. You'll find more information there about what's on the ballot. You can also find all the polling places around town, as well as wait times at votetravis.com. We'll put both of those addresses in the comments. And remember, no matter where you live, you can vote at any location in town. Polls open at 7 a.m. and close at 7 p.m. As long as you're in line by 7 p.m., you will be allowed to vote. So make a plan, go vote, and let's make sure that these results truly represent the values of our community. And speaking of community values, civil rights is certainly one of them. 3 years ago, before I was even on the dais, City Council voted to create a brand new Office of Civil Rights. The most recent budget we approved finally included money for this venture. And in February, our first ever civil rights officer went straight to work. Carol Johnson and her team will be in charge of investigating compliance with city, state, and federal civil rights and non-discrimination laws. That's a big task, but if there's anybody who was up for it, I'd say it's Carol. She joins us tonight. Oh, there you are. Hi, Carol.
Hi.
Tonight, and I could go on and on about your background and your experience, but I'm sure you'll be able to tell us a lot more about yourself and give us that big picture throughout the conversation. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much for having me. It's certainly my pleasure and honor to be here tonight.
Ditto. I know everybody's wanting to know, what is this new thing about and how will it affect my life and for my neighbors? So can you maybe give a brief rundown on the Civil Rights Office and what your role is like as the Civil Rights Officer?
So yes, thank you again. So the Civil Rights Office is an awesome venture by the city to ensure that we have a comprehensive place for folks to come and be educated about what civil rights means, to understand what their roles and responsibilities are, and to have a centralized location for civil rights enforcement for the city. And so as part of the Civil Rights Enforcement Office, we are responsible for the enforcement of rights around housing and public accommodations, employment, labor standards laws such as fair chance hiring and protections if you are living with HIV, Title VI, Title VII, Title VIII, all of those areas of civil rights are so important to our equality of life, and to ensure that we have all of those things that we all hold dear.
I think you touched on it a couple times there. It touches everything. The more you name, the more I recognize, oh, this touches everything that we do. So I really appreciate that we have an expert. And I hope that the city takes the opportunity to make sure to offer you the support that you need. And, along those lines, when you saw this job opening in the classifieds, I'm curious what about it spoke to you, and how did you decide I'm going for it? I'm gonna throw my hat in the ring.
I think the important thing to me was that the city had an initiative, and took those affirmative steps to make sure that an office such as this was available for the people. And I think that, when I saw this, I was like, oh my gosh, this is perfect. This is what I care about. It's what I'm passionate about. It's what I believe in, and it's what I do. Fortunately, I had the opportunity to create a civil rights office for the state of Arkansas many years ago. And so we did enforcement of Title VIII, which is the fair housing component of the Civil Rights Act of 1968. And so we didn't have any kind of civil rights enforcement for the entire state. And so I had the privilege of being there at the ground level, starting that, and creating that enforcement agency that provided those protections for the state. And so when I saw this opportunity in Austin, and particularly in Texas, I was very excited. I do have family that lives here in Texas. And though I haven't lived in Texas in about 30 years, I was actually born in Dallas, Texas. So it was just a wonderful opportunity for me to continue to do the very important work that I love in a state that I very much care about, for the people that I care about. Civil rights, when you look at where we are now, as opposed to where we were, in 1968 and 1964. Unfortunately, there are so many, these disparities are still there. We've gone a long ways in some ways and not so far in other ways. And I was very excited about the opportunity to continue that work here with a city council and leadership in city government that actually cared about creating these opportunities for people. So when I saw it, I was like, okay, this is perfect. And this is certainly an opportunity to do what we need to do. And now is the time. Now is always going to be the time to do the right thing. But, we're ripe, I think, in the city of Austin. And I'd like to see us create an office that will be the flagship for the rest of Texas and for cities across America.
Well, that's an interesting transition there, because I was thinking about looking over your bio. I see that, you've worked in Arkansas on civil rights, and you've worked in Oregon on civil rights, and talk about, two geographically completely different places. But then, my kids are in this Black Leadership Academy with Dr. Courtney Robinson with the Black Excellence and Advancement Foundation. They have this Black Leadership Academy. It's a weekend club. It's a school club. And they're doing a project about civil rights and history. And in them doing this project, they have to ask an elder questions. And so a lot of the question prompts are centered around the Great Migration. And so, really talking about that with my kids has had that kind of in my headspace, but then also remembering distinctly having conversations about, pretty pronounced white supremacist activity in Oregon with my older kids. And so can you give us a little bit of a peek into what was it like in those places? And, what did those experiences bring to you to help prepare you for this new role in Austin, Texas?
Sure. It's funny because I think we all kind of have our perceptions of what equality and opportunity looks like, based on our experiences in different parts of the country. And I said I had to move, halfway across the country to understand this full scope and breadth of where we are with in terms of racism and discrimination in America. Oregon has a very sordid past, as many, which America does with discrimination. And Oregon had the Black exclusionary laws, and so they have there's some very deep rooted systemic issues of racism and segregation, in Oregon as in other parts of the country. I think that my work there, and also while I was there in Oregon, I also worked I've had the opportunity to work in all areas of government, I think, by now. So I've worked at the municipal level, at the state level, and at the federal level. And at the federal level, I had the opportunity to work as a regional director for the states of Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Alaska, and just kind of interacting with folks there and seeing the disparities and the issues involving housing and employment. And really understanding that wherever I am as a person, I'm still a Black woman in America. And that didn't change because I moved to Oregon, or now that I'm here in Texas, or when I was in Arkansas. And so some of those same, or all of the same issues that, I experienced here in the South as both a woman, as an African-American, as a professional, as an attorney in a male-dominated field, they didn't change based on where I was. But I got a glimpse into the perspective of how it felt to be that Black woman in Oregon. So I guess, for me, it was a way to kind of round out my lived experience, and bring all of that to the table coming here to Austin. I think that, regionally there are certain issues that are germane to a particular region, but racism is racism, discrimination is discrimination, and it is something that needs to be combated wherever we are and in every place that we are. So, I guess, just for me, being able to experience some of the things that I experienced there in Oregon and understanding their history, I guess in a way helps me to understand the history that we have here in our state, and just ways that we need to provide the enforcement, the education, the outreach. We need to talk more about creating open access, creating spaces that allow people to share their experiences, allow people to, be in places where they can educate themselves and be educated on discrimination and how to combat those things.
Austin is my hometown, and we're a progressive city, and we have a lot of good civil rights ordinances on the books, but it's also a city with a very, like many, I think you already pointed that out, like many, many American cities, it's a city with a shameful history of racism that we are very much still grappling with today. And, as someone who was born and raised here, I've seen it play out my whole life, but I do wonder, given your experiences in other cities, I'd love to know your perspective as a Black woman who just moved here to Austin, Texas in 2021.
Well, I mean, I can say that, I am no different than any other Black woman in that I experience um, lack of access and inequality and all of those things. I think that here in Austin, I guess one of the differences here for Austin is that um, Austin is a very progressive city in a state that doesn't necessarily prescribe to all of the same ideologies that we do here as our council members do. And that tends to create some challenges in terms of, how we look at enforcing civil rights, how we're able to um, uh, provide the types of protections that we need for our residents and for Austinites. I think that one of the things that I really enjoy seeing here is how involved our people are, how involved our organizations are how involved our citizens are in government, in creating the type of environment that we would need to push us forward in 2021. And I think that's a very important component. I mean, all of the issues that we see now in civil rights have come to light, but they're not necessarily new. I've heard people say over and over again that we live in unprecedented times, but in actuality, we really don't live in unprecedented times. All of these issues that we're seeing with over policing and lack of access to jobs and lack of access to housing because of those barriers based on race and other factors that should play no part in the decision-making process about whether or not you have a job, or whether or not you have someplace to live, or whether or not you're able to get into stay at a hotel or shop where you want to shop. Unfortunately, these times are not unprecedented. We saw, way back in 1963 in the March on Washington, that all of these areas that we were, fighting against, that we're fighting against now, we were fighting against at that time. But I am encouraged again to see that here in Austin, we have so many people who are willing to jump into that fight, who are engaged, who really care about these issues, and who are really taking a stand against racism, against discrimination, and really want to fight against those systemic barriers that close doors in ways and in environments that they shouldn't. So I guess, for the one thing for me, I was really encouraged by, all of the involvement, engagement, and activity. And that is one of the things that I think is going to be really, really important for the Office of Civil Rights, is that we are able to really meet people where they are, that we're able to provide the types of services and the level of service that folks need and that they deserve from their government. I truly believe that, as a governmental entity, we have a responsibility, and let's face it, to try to right some of the wrongs that government played a role in help creating. And so I'm excited about the opportunity to work, like I said, with our very engaged citizenry in our population to make sure that, that what we envision as a very inclusive and open community for Austinites is what we're able to bring to fruition. And that means engaging our residents that live here, our business owners, our employers, all of those folks, so that they understand, what is civil rights? What does it mean? What our responsibilities are? How can we provide, again, the environment for the level of just improvement for the quality of life that everyone should have. And the fact that we here in Austin really, I think, really care and really believe in this, and the city council and the city leadership has shown dedication, towards that goal by bringing on a civil rights officer, by creating the Office of Civil Rights. And so I intend to run with that and create the education and outreach, to create these programs, to create these opportunities for us to really, really, really enforce where we need and educate as well. So I'm excited about that. And I think that, that's what takes, in my mind, what's going to take Texas, over the top. Austin is.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I appreciate that you said, the part about educating, because so much of what we're going through right now, we're all going to have to sort of learn something different than we're accustomed to. Another dynamic thing about Austin is that sometimes we move faster on issues than our state leaders and lawmakers would like. For example, our paid sick leave ordinance. It got struck down by the Texas Supreme Court last summer. How do you plan on doing your job effectively when people at the state level keep taking away the things that you can enforce?
That's really kind of a crucial component to, I think, what's going to really make a difference in how we're able to be effective. I think we've got to be vigilant. We've been working on, a couple of bills right now that are not necessarily or just not friendly towards civil rights. So I think that, being in that way vocal about what the needs of Austinites are in terms of, civil rights enforcement. I'm encouraged that at the federal level, the administration has taken on a renewed interest in some civil rights enforcement that, quite frankly, had been abandoned in immediate past years. And so when we look at areas of affirmatively furthering fair housing and making sure that we have protections for the LGBTQ community, and making sure that we're really looking at racial disparities and disparate impact in all areas, again, employment, Title VI, that we're looking at ensuring that those that receive federal funds are really distributing those services and provide access in a very equitable way, transportation, all of those areas. So I just think in terms of, how can we guard against not being effective? I think it's being vigilant and making sure that, at the state level, when laws are coming to the books or when bills are being introduced, that we're very vocal about, how these bills can harm civil rights, that we're at the table, and that we're actively providing, solutions to some of these issues. But it is, it's a challenge. It is a challenge when there are forces that act against, civil rights and access and trying to deal with some of the disparities that we see all across the board in education. You mentioned voting. And I can't even mention housing enough because it's so important to our quality of life. That, home ownership is one of the greatest ways that we build wealth generationally. If you're locked out of access to home ownership, a lot of folks, Americans, they don't have the opportunities to build the wealth that we want to, leave for our children and our children's children. That's, again, it's important for us to have a seat at the table. I think that the Office of Civil Rights and having a civil rights officer gives us, in a lot of ways, that sort of seat at the table. I know for me, I'm, continuing to scour to see, what bills are coming up, how we can truly, again, make sure that we at least have a say. We're not going to be able to control every bill, obviously, that gets filed, but we certainly can ensure that when bills are filed that are not friends to civil rights, when bills are filed that we know full well are contrary to the mission of equal access and equal opportunity, and that will hurt civil rights enforcement, then we certainly will use that opportunity to again have a voice at the table, let our voice be heard, and try to help come up with solutions to some of these critical issues that we're faced with here in Austin.
I appreciate all that. One of the things that I thought about when you were speaking was about, first of all, I really appreciate that you recognize the importance of housing. It's the thing that I've been hollering since I got here, and 2021 is the year to amplify, the critical need. I mean, we're desperate for housing. We need housing. And, as you were saying that, it got me thinking, I had a conversation with a constituent today. And, while I can appreciate, the opportunity for economic empowerment through home ownership, the reality for us here in Austin is that most of our residents are renters. Literally, more than 50% of our residents are renters. And I think a lot about, we have some great organizations that do tenant advocacy work. And, I know they're helping folks to work on pursuing tenant protections. But I really do hope that, as we continue these conversations and obviously inevitably go into the conversation around housing, that we're keeping renters high on that list of considerations. And then the other thing you said that really got me thinking was, you alluded to, a lot of this work not being new, but, being work that we're accustomed to. It's just a different time. I wonder if you expect any additional challenges as we come out of the pandemic, and you're approaching, your civil rights professional, stewardship.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the pandemic has highlighted, the racial and the other types of disparities that, that have been here all along. But, the fact that there has been some, inequality of access to, resources. So I think that it will be very important, coming out of the pandemic to really ensure that we meet people where they are, making sure that we're going into communities. The pandemic has caused, so much devastation, in Austin and across the country. And I think that we're going to see, such need for governmental services. And we'll continue to see the need for governmental services, and for us, again, to be there, to be available, to be accessible, to be transparent, and to be active and to be effective. So I believe that, obviously, we're going to, I believe we need to make sure that we meet people where they are. So again, being able to go out and talk to folks, being able to, I think having workshops out in community, having opportunities for folks to file complaints, and not have to come into the office. Again, whatever that looks like. In terms of our enforcement and outreach activities, I think, that's going to be the challenges for us, the digital divide. Not everyone has access to computers and technology. How are we going to meet that need? So, I mean, just, kind of looking at all of those things, the disparities in education, where some children, had access to the things that they needed during the pandemic and some didn't. What's going to happen when we come out on the other side of that? How are we going to see some of those issues manifested in our schools? And then how are we going to deal with some of those? And so there's just so many. There's so many.
You're thinking about it all, though, right? It's like we can't start building some solutions if we're not recognizing what our challenges are right now, the ones that we can see, and then, really projecting. I keep hearing these astronomical numbers, in terms of percentages around learning loss. And actually, Eliza, I can't remember how she said it. We had some educators on recently, and she didn't call it learning loss. I forget what she called it, and I'm kicking myself for it. But, recognizing that our kids are going to struggle some academically, and realizing the fact that you realize that is in fact an impediment to their, having full access to their civil rights.
Right.
You thinking about it, you said transportation, which you said housing. You're saying the things that we need to be thinking about. And I really just look forward to my colleagues and I being able to make certain that you have what you need to be successful, and having that place to turn, having our constituents have that place to turn. I really appreciate in your description that you described it as a comprehensive location. Oftentimes that's what our constituents struggle with, is having to bounce around. So knowing that this is where you go to talk to, folks about this is so very helpful. And I really just couldn't appreciate your being here more. I'm so glad that the council before me made this fantastic decision, and that you were our choice. So looking forward to working with you moving forward.
Thank you so much. And again, I appreciate all of your work, your dedication. It shows right through. And I think the question was posed earlier, what is it about Austin? It's all of you. That's what it is about Austin. And I so look forward to working with you all to continue to build on what you've already started, and to make this enforcement exactly what it needs to be for Austinites.
We couldn't end it on a better note. Miss Carol Johnson, Austin's very first, and hopefully not our last. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have a good rest of your night and a good weekend.
Thank you. You too.
All right, y'all. So as the late, great John Lewis said, democracy is not a state. It is an act. It requires constant vigilance and constant work. That's why I'm so glad that we have people like Carol Johnson right here in our fair city, working to ensure that civil rights of all of our residents remain honored and protected. John Lewis also said that the vote is the most powerful nonviolent change agent you have in a democratic society. You must use it because it is not guaranteed. You can lose it. I hope everyone keeps those words in mind tonight as we head into another election day tomorrow. Lots of people struggled so very hard throughout the history of this country to secure our rights to be heard at the polls. It's an awesome responsibility that too many of us take for granted. All of us have the chance to help steer the destiny of our local democracy. And if we don't, someone else will do it for us. And we've been down that road before. So tell everyone you know to learn about what's on the ballot by looking up the multilingual voting guides at lwvaustin.org/voter-guide. And head to votetravis.com to find polling locations and wait times. And remember, you can vote at any election center across town. And as long as you're in line by 7 p.m. when those polls close, you will still be able to cast a ballot. That does it for this week's installment of Talk with Tasha. We'll be back here live on Friday, April 30th. Oh, we're here right now on April 30th. So we'll be back week after next. In the meantime, if you have any questions or concerns, you can always reach out to me through the District 1 office. That's District 1, the number 1, at austintexas.gov. So until next time, stay safe, stay healthy. Please go vote. Bye, y'all.